The dim glow of the city skyline shimmered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the extravagant penthouse, casting long shadows over the polished marble floors. Laughter and the clinking of glasses filled the air, a mix of celebration and arrogance. In the center of it all stood Daniel Carter, young, handsome, and disgustingly rich. He had everything a man could dream of: wealth, power, and a reputation that made women swoon and men envy him. But beneath the designer suits and expensive cologne, Daniel thrived on one thing above all else: winning. The bet started as a joke. Few of his friends, all trust fund kids with nothing better to do, had been discussing the absurd lengths people would go for money, for love, for status. Someone threw out the idea that attraction was purely physical, that love was just a matter of appearances. And then, as the night wore on and the alcohol loosened their tongues, the conversation turned into a challenge, one that Daniel, with his cocky smirk and unshakable confidence, couldn't resist. "I bet you wouldn't last 6 months married to someone completely opposite of your type," his friend Marcus teased, swirling his whiskey. "Define opposite," Daniel replied, leaning back against the leather couch. "Someone you wouldn't even glance at twice. No models, no influencers, no gym rats, someone unexpected." The laughter grew louder. A few of them pulled out their phones, scrolling through social media, searching for the perfect candidate, and then, almost as if fate had a twisted sense of humor, they landed on her profile, Emily Lawson. She wasn't conventionally beautiful by society's cruel standards, at least not the kind of beauty Daniel was used to. She was overweight, dressed simply, and seemed more comfortable in a bookstore than at a high-profile event. There were no bikini photos, no high-fashion outfits, no extravagant trips to the Maldives on her page. Instead, her feed was filled with pictures of homemade meals, her rescue dog, and snippets of poetry. She was different, and different was exactly what they needed for this bet. Daniel smirked. "Fine, pick her. I'll marry her." The room erupted in cheers, but beneath it all, there was a flicker of something else. Something Daniel himself didn't quite recognize. He had no idea that the bet he so carelessly accepted would change everything. That the woman they chose as a joke would turn out to be the one thing his money couldn't buy. Because Emily Lawson was not what she seemed. And Daniel Carter was about to learn that the hard way. The plan was simple, at least that's what Daniel thought. Find Emily, charm her, marry her, and stick around just long enough to win the bet. It wasn't about love. It wasn't even about attraction. It was about proving a point, showing his friends that he could do anything, that nothing was out of his control. After all, how hard could it be? He had money, looks, and charisma. If he could close million-dollar deals with a handshake, he could certainly convince one ordinary woman to marry him. But Daniel had underestimated something. Emily Lawson wasn't the kind of person who could be easily swayed. When he first approached her at the little cafe she worked at, she barely looked up from the book she was reading. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the place nearly empty except for a few students hunched over their laptops. He had walked in with the confidence of a man who had never heard the word no in his life, expecting her to fall for his effortless charm like so many others had. Instead, she just blinked at him, unimpressed. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice polite but distant. Daniel faltered for the briefest second before flashing his signature smile. "Yeah, I'd like a recommendation. Something different." Emily raised an eyebrow. Different how? He hadn't thought this far ahead. He had expected her to giggle, maybe blush, maybe even drop whatever she was holding in shock that someone like him was talking to her. But she didn't. She was calm, composed, and entirely unfazed. "I don't know," he admitted, leaning on the counter. "Something that surprises me." That made her smile, just a little. She studied him for a moment, then walked over to one of the shelves and pulled out a book. It wasn't one he recognized. The cover was worn, the title unfamiliar. She slid it across the counter. "Try this." He picked it up, glancing at the pages. "You really think I'll like it?" "I don't know," she said, shrugging. "But that's the fun part, isn't it?" That was the moment Daniel realized something about Emily. She wasn't just different from the women he knew. She was different from anyone he had ever met, and that terrified him. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of unexpected moments. He kept showing up at the cafe, and Emily, after some initial skepticism, started talking to him. She had a sharp mind, a quiet strength that intrigued him. She wasn't easily impressed by his money, and she never once treated him like he was someone special. In fact, half the time, it felt like she was the one studying him. Daniel had never worked this hard for a woman's attention before, and he couldn't figure out why he cared so much. But then, one night, as they sat on a park bench watching the city lights, he realized the truth. Somewhere along the way, the game had stopped feeling like a game. He wasn't supposed to care. I wasn't supposed to feel anything at all. Yet, as he looked at Emily, laughing at something he had said, her eyes bright, her presence so effortlessly warm, he knew he was in trouble. Because for the first time in his life, Daniel Carter was falling, and he had no idea how to stop it. The story is building up tension, keeping it engaging while making the characters feel real. Let me know if you'd like me to keep going or adjust anything. Daniel wasn't sure when everything changed. Maybe it was the late-night conversations that lasted longer than they should have. Maybe it was the way Emily never treated him like he was better than anyone else. Or maybe it was the simple fact that for the first time in his life he felt seen, not as Daniel Carter, the millionaire, but as just Daniel. But the truth had a way of creeping up when you least expected it. It was a rainy evening when everything came crashing down. They were at her small apartment, curled up on the couch, listening to the soft hum of jazz playing from her old record player. It should have been perfect. But the weight of his secret had been suffocating him for weeks, and no matter how much he tried to push it away, he knew he couldn't. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a quiet kind of trust that made his chest ache. "Something's on your mind," she said softly. He swallowed hard, his fingers tightening around the edge of the cushion. He had two choices: keep lying and risk losing her later, or tell the truth and lose her now. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, and so he did. He told her everything: the bet, the way it started as a game, the way it was never supposed to mean anything. He told her how he thought it would be easy, how he had assumed she would be just another part of the joke. And then, finally, he told her the part that scared him the most, that somewhere along the way, it had stopped being a bet, that she had changed him in ways he never thought possible, that he wasn't the same man who had walked into that cafe weeks ago. The silence that followed was unbearable. Emily didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just sat there, staring at him, and that was worse than anything he had imagined. Finally, she took a shaky breath. "So, from the start, I was just some experiment to you?" "No," he said quickly, shaking his head. "I mean, yes, at first, but not anymore. Not for a long time." She stood up, crossing her arms over her chest like she was trying to protect herself from the weight of his words. "You let me fall for you," she said, her voice barely holding together. "And the whole time you were just proving a point to your friends?" He reached for her, but she stepped back. The distance between them felt impossible to close. "I never meant to hurt you," he whispered. "Emily, please, just go," she said, her voice breaking. Daniel wanted to fight, to explain, to do anything, to make her understand. But the look in her eyes told him that no apology could fix what he had done. So, he left. The days that followed were some of the longest of his life. He had won the bet, technically, but it didn't matter. His friends cheered, clinked glasses, laughed about how unbelievable the whole thing had been, but he couldn't hear any of it. The only thing that mattered was the hollow ache in his chest. He tried to move on, tried to drown himself in work, in distractions. But no matter what he did, he kept thinking about Emily, her smile, her kindness, the way she had looked at him before she knew the truth. He had spent his whole life believing he could have anything he wanted. And now, the one thing he wanted more than anything was gone. Weeks passed, then months, and then one evening, as he was walking past the cafe, he saw her. She was sitting by the window reading. just like the first time he had seen her. But this time, there was something different. A quiet strength in the way she carried herself, a kind of peace he had never truly understood until now. He didn't know if she would ever forgive him, but he knew one thing. He was done being the man he used to be, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start over.